There is some really concerning news coming out of Wuhan, China, right now that a virus has been discovered originating from bats, but it's transmissible to humans. And this news comes on the 5-year anniversary of the March 11th, 2020 pandemic. That was the date when the pandemic was declared, and it was also the day of Passover that year. And so with Passover coming up in just a few weeks, along with other disturbing reports and data points that you just can't ignore, it's time to investigate what this blood moon of March 14th, 2025 is all about. On the evening of March 13th to the 14th, all of North America will be in the direct view of a total lunar eclipse, also called a blood moon. And so it's time to remember Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, and see what God is orchestrating. South America will also see this celestial sign, but North America is the clear recipient. As you can see, I have the data here from NASA. March 14th, 2025, we can see that the blood moon is going to be visible for the entire United States primarily, and of course South America will see it, but to varying degrees. Before we talk about what this celestial sign might indicate, you will have a chance to see it around midnight, depending on where you live. So if you're in San Francisco, you can expect to see this blood moon on March 13th at 11:58 p.m., so almost midnight. If you're in Denver, let's say the middle of the United States, Denver, you're going to see the blood moon around 12:58 a.m. And if you're East Coast, like New York City, you'll see the blood moon at almost 3 a.m. on March 14th. 2:58 a.m. to be exact will be the maximum magnitude of the blood moon, but make no mistake about it, it lasts for 6 hours and 3 minutes, according to timeanddate.com. So what's interesting about this sign is that it's going to take place right in the middle of Ramadan, which is the holiest month on the Islamic calendar. The month of Ramadan is expected to begin on March 1st, 2025. And so this also happens so the middle of Ramadan would therefore be right around the 14th to the 15th. So when the Americas are seeing a blood moon, all of a sudden Ramadan is right in the middle, but it's also the same time as Purim, or Purim, as is pronounced in Hebrew. Purim is going to be special this year. It's called Purim Meshulash, which is a 3-day Purim, and that also falls within this window of the blood moon. And going into the blood moon, we also have a report talking about how there's a new really bad cold coming out of China with pandemic potential, and it's a variant of the really bad cold that went around the world in 2020. And it has the potential to become another pandemic, cause another pandemic. It's actually being transmitted through bats. They're saying this is probably where it's going to come. It's a strain living within bats. It's going to be transmissible to humans. HKU5-CoV2, strikingly similar to the pandemic virus. And people are saying all over the media that history might repeat itself, and so there's a lot to talk about with this one. There's so many data points that are now converging, and it's time to talk about what is going on, because as soon as this was just a week ago on February 21st, as soon as this was announced that there's this new virus in town, well, we saw the stock market not doing so well, and along with cryptocurrency is now in a downtrend. Did the markets peak in February? And is this something that we should be worrying about? I'm telling you, with all the data that I've looked at, this is a pretty big deal, pretty big problem. So, welcome to Overcome Babylon. I'm your brother Abraham, as always. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and share this video, because I'm going to go into some details about why we should really be not being anxious. We shouldn't be anxious about things. We shouldn't be freaking out, but we should be preparing and expecting probably something to do with a pandemic. Maybe, I should say maybe, not probably, although the probabilities are always present. Something to do with the economy. I'll show evidence of that, and possibly war kicking into higher gear in the Middle East because of what I'm seeing with blood moons, with scripture, I'm going to tie all this in together for you. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I start looking into this topic of biblical astronomy, which is a good thing to do, we should be aware of the signs of the times. We shouldn't be ignorant of what God is orchestrating because they're his signs. But when I get into this whole topic of biblical astronomy, I get a little overwhelmed by the information that tends to go out there because, a lot of people will say with a lot of authority, the blood moon is going to be Revelation chapter 6, the blood moon there, or the blood moon that's coming is going to be Joel chapter 2. And people get really assertive and really dogmatic about things. And when you ask them or you investigate their reasons for believing such and such outcomes, usually the response is what I have on screen here. Trust me, bro. Which should really be a big red flag. This is my red flag. As you can see, trust me, bro. No, we need to actually have a little bit more of methodology and science and reasoning going into how we discern the signs in the celestial realm, right? The heavenly bodies. We need to have a little bit better of an approach than trust me, bro. So I'm going to give you my 3-step framework for understanding biblical astronomy, which is not astrology. We're not here trying to do palm readings and do some pagan weird stuff. We're just looking at what God's doing because they're his signs as much as the enemy wants to hijack them. Now, if you want to see my 3-step formula in action, this is exactly what I did in Bible Prophecy Secrets 2, my book, which I released in April of 2024. It was April 22nd, 2024. If you want to see this in action, my 3-step framework, you can download this book for free. You can also grab a copy from me at my website in the link down below this video. If you get it from Amazon, you don't want to do that. You want to get it from my website because you get the free audiobook with any purchase of Bible Prophecy Secrets 2. So you don't want to get it from Amazon. Get it from me. So, yes, Biblical Astronomy 3-Step Framework. That book, by the way, I don't say this to brag. I'm just saying because it's true. It was the #1 bestseller in 2024 in astronomy. It was very well received. People gave me incredible feedback on it, and they're like, wow, biblical astronomy makes so much more sense now. Thank you for breaking down these concepts. And the reason why the book was such a success is because when you follow the 3-step framework, you can actually truly understand what's going on and not constantly be guessing or taking scriptures out of context to fit weird narratives. You can just look at what's going on and you can match reality with what the Bible already declares. So the first thing is you have to look at historical patterns, which is what I do in the first secret. Historical patterns and major recent news. You kind of like look at these two together. So historical patterns alongside major recent news, and I'm saying 1 year or less for like the recent part of it. Otherwise it becomes history. We just look at the history or historical patterns. So the 3-step framework, historical patterns alongside major recent news. You throw this into your study of biblical astronomy and you will understand a lot of concepts that I think people will miss pretty easily. Also, we look at the places. I know this is going to be pretty like obvious, but you have to actually look at the places of the eclipse. And when we're talking about eclipses, which is what we're going to be talking about today with the blood moon, which is a lunar eclipse. So your solar eclipses, but this also can apply to planetary alignments, comets. There's different things, but you have to look at the places in this case of the eclipses. In this case, we're just looking at one blood moon, but I'm going to show you how there are other things to consider with that. And then once you have patterns of history and news, places of the eclipse, then you can finally cross-examine scriptures. Cross-examine the scriptures, but you have to use using 3 laws of interpretation, which I present in Bible Prophecy Secrets. 3 laws of interpretation: law of first mention, law of definitions, law of context. If you apply these 3 steps to your understanding of astronomy, you're going to be absolutely blessed and able to figure out a lot of things, and you're going to be able to be like, well, that guy kind of made that up, or that person's kind of, he's off track with what he's presenting. and you're going to be able to discern what's kind of fabricated and what's not real. So again, looking at the historical patterns going into this one is it's pretty eye-opening. Like I was saying, we're looking at major news developments. What are the odds of there being a new really bad cold virus that's going to probably spread around the world? We'll see how badly it gets hyped up. What are the odds of that happening together with some of the other things we're going to talk about? There's a planetary alignment happening, for instance, tonight. So if you're watching this video tonight, if you're in North America, you should be able to see Saturn, Mercury, Neptune, Venus, Uranus, Jupiter, and Mars. So we're having a 7 planetary alignment, 7 planets, 7 stars. According to BBC Sky at Night magazine, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Uranus will be easily visible, but Mercury, Saturn, and Neptune will require a bit of preparation and timing. So again, it's a planetary alignment. It's interesting. It's happening tonight, February 28th, 2025. And that's why I'm in a hurry to do this video. Hopefully I get it out in time, but that's going to happen. And I've talked about this here on Overcome Babylon before. Solar System Geometry Survey has been documenting how planetary alignments affect Earth, how they affect geological systems, geology. And what they're saying is, hey, and they just updated this today, February 28th, as I'm doing this video, the convergence of planetary and lunar geometry on February 28th and March 1st will likely result in temporal clustering of stronger earthquakes, potentially peaking around March 3rd. A high 6 to 7 magnitude earthquake is possible somewhere. Now you can check out their full report. And again, that's why this book right here, Bible Prophecy Secrets 2, was so successful in what it did with the framework that I established, is because before there was ever 7.0 earthquakes like the one off in Mendocino, California, or the 5.0 we just had in Texas this month on February 8th. Like there's been earthquakes in the New Madrid, earthquakes in the Cascadia like crazy, mostly in the Cascadia, to a lesser extent in the New Madrid. Again, when you understand planetary alignments, these things, you're correlating the historical patterns, taking the time to understand these things and how the celestial bodies, how God uses them to convey messages, you're actually going to understand the deeper things like Genesis 1:14 talks about. So that's why Bible Prophecy Secrets made waves, is because I predicted earthquakes before there were really big ones. Now, I said there's going to be massive ones, right, in the book. We're not there yet, but we definitely have already seen an uptick. And now you're seeing again that, again, these are probabilities. They're saying, hey, look, there's 80% chance of this, 70% chance. Well, that means that there's 30% chance of a no as well, right? So if there's 70% chance of a 7.5 to 8.4 magnitude earthquake, that means there's 30% chance of nothing. So, or at least not that high or something else. So again, they're just probabilities, but I'm telling you, sooner or later, the big ones are coming because we are overdue. The cycles are telling us of history that we're overdue for big earthquake. That's just one aspect to look at though. So let's talk about this new China virus that's a really bad cold spreading all over the world. Possibly, not yet. So this article's from Daily Mail, and they're saying, scenes eerily reminiscent of the beginnings of the really bad cold. In scenes like that, researchers at the infamous Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, of course, detected a new strain living within bats. The timing. And then you go to other places like First Post, they also reported on this, basically kind of parroting the same stuff. Bloomberg, this was just from 5 days ago. Bloomberg kind of gave a little bit more details about what this means, the implications. And they're saying that it's going to have similar disease pathology. It's going to be, we're going to need more, poke makers. We're going to need more people to, this is going to be, we need to make sure that we're getting prepared because this is going to be something that could take over the world. They're saying we just don't know how efficiently it can be transmitted or if it can be transmitted yet. It can infect human cells, but can it cross from bats to humans? And there's going to be this huge pandemic. We're just not there yet. But the warning signs are there. Now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is one indicator I look at when I'm looking at the markets. The markets responded very badly to this. So the news came out on February 21st, And the markets have since seen a downward trend. This is the 6 month on the Dow Jones. We're starting to see a downtrend in the market. Everybody's talking about this now. Now, if you look at it zoomed out, it doesn't look that bad. If I zoom in, it kind of looks worse. Of course, there's a little bit of an upward bounce recovery. So yeah, we're looking at a little bit of economic instability going into this blood moon, which I'm going to talk about more, the more details on that in a moment. But the Dow Jones responded to the February 21st news going into the blood moon. So again, we're just looking at the historical patterns now. We'll talk about the places a little bit more detail, and then we'll connect the scriptures at the end. Cryptocurrency also, I think $1 trillion was wiped out of the market cap of cryptocurrency. You can see Bitcoin's down. All the major coins are down. Again, this really started happening around February 21st with the declaration or the news cycle saying, hey, it's not a declaration yet. There's a new cold that's really, really bad. And we've talked, there's been a lot of variants of really, really bad colds, right? But, so we've kind of become a little desensitized at this point because look at all these variants. You have all these Greek letters, you have all these variants. It's like, okay, you're just crying wolf at this point. But again, if you pay attention to the timing of this news, it's beyond coincidence for me because when you go to March 11th, 2020, it has been exactly almost 5 years. We are now approaching the 5-year anniversary where the WHO said we're going to declare a pandemic of a really, really bad cold that's spreading around the world. This is a pandemic. And what happened? You know what happened. Beginning on March 11th, 2020 onward, the world shut down. But most people fail to realize to this day that that was a Passover that year. Not according to... there's different calendar interpretations of how to determine the holy days of God, the biblical feasts. According to Aviv Barley, according to the sighted new moons, and according to exactly how it's written in the Bible, so not the Hillel calendar of Judaism, which sometimes is correct and sometimes it's not, but the actual, just the way the Bible says it. Passover, March 11th, 2020, that was when the WHO declared a really, really bad cold pandemic around the world. March 11, 2020. What happened on March 11, 2020? The Dow plunged 10% amid coronavirus fears for its worst day since the 1987 market crash. When we look at this, it looks like this article is from March 11, 2020, by the way. So this is what came out on March 11, 2020, as soon as the declaration was made of a really, really bad cold. You can see that the single largest one-day percentage drops of the Dow, yeah, that was pretty unprecedented. Let's take a look at it. It was one of the biggest drops in history. When we look at it on a chart from Markets, Business Insider, you can see that overnight, almost overnight, from February to March 16th, you can see that the markets peaked in February. Interesting, right? That's what I'm telling you, what it looks like right now. It looks like history is being cyclical and it's repetition at this point. But I could be wrong too. But look, there's a double top. You have a double top January 13th, February 10th, about a month apart. You have two peaks there. And then all of a sudden, you know what happened. There's enough information going around that, hey, something's going on in China. Something's not right. All the insiders knew to sell the bags to retail, and there was a massive, massive drop. March 16th, you went from 29,300 points at the peak in February to a month later, March, you have 19,000 as the close. So you have about a 40% drop in the market of the Dow Jones from February to March. You have a 40% drop. And then what happened after that? A bunch of money printing, stimulus money, rescue plans, money printing, and we haven't seen the end of that since then. But let me tell you something. I think we're due for a correction. And going back to the blood moon of March 13th to 14th, it could be that this is warning us of what to expect here. The markets are already reacting. Omens like blood moons or solar eclipses or partial lunar eclipses, they can be signs of economic trouble, war, pestilence, right? In the case of a new really bad cold, possibly. They're signs that something ain't right. And so when we look at this, compare it to other historical patterns. So I've kind of shown you the precedent of the whole idea of a virus, or the whole idea of the economics not looking good at this moment, when we look at the religious side and what's going on with like the religious convergence of different religious practices, like I said, Purim Meshulash, it's very rare for it to be a 3-day Purim. Usually it's 2. Again, this is a made-up holiday in Judaism. Again, it's not necessarily a bad one. I actually kind of like Purim, the whole concept of it, celebrating the Esther and Mordecai's victory over Haman, and the survival of Judah, the whole kingdom of Judah. It's a good lesson, a good story. It's in the book of Esther. And so, but the next time that we're going to see what's called a Purim Meshulash, which is a 3-day Purim as opposed to a 2-day, the next time this is going to happen is 2045. So essentially, it's really interesting that during this blood moon, there's a Purim Meshulash, a 3-day observance where it's not normally a 3-day observance, and the next time you're going to see it is 2045, which, how important is 2045? I've mentioned that 2045 is extremely important. Ramadan is also coming up. If you go to islamic-relief.org, they have it all projected here. So March, the Ramadan day is the same thing as the day in March. So Ramadan 17 is March 17, for instance. So yes, you're going to have that crossover there. And as I showed you earlier, there is a overlap of Purim and Ramadan. Purim is actually the jolliest day of the year for the Jews, for those that practice Judaism. And then Ramadan is the holiest, most sacred month where Muslims are fasting. And so you have this real contrast. They're totally kind of opposites. Of course, Purim isn't a month long, but you get my point. It's kind of interesting that obviously there's division, there's contention, there's strife between the Arab world and the Jews right now. And one thing that might cause some problems is the red heifers that are in Israel. So I'm going to play a clip here. This is from Joseph Dumont Sighted Moon. He met with a guy named Chuck Mueller, who is actually the caretaker of the red heifers that everybody's talked about on CBN News, and a bunch of YouTubers have talked about it. I'm going to play this clip. Check out what he says. It's pretty eye-opening.
2 of them were qualified to do this. They were scheduled to do it on the Mount of Olives on Passover.
Last year, 2024?
When they had permits to do it. But the government, again, revokes the permits because of the fear of the war. The war and exciting the Arabs more. And so they withdrew the permits, and so they're still standing here. There is talk now, there's interest, and we don't talk about this too loudly.
Okay, so the whole point there, the reason I played that clip is because this guy is saying that the red heifers were already on schedule. The permits were pulled. Everything was ready for them to be sacrificed on the Mount of Olives last year in 2024. And if you keep watching this video, there's the implication he's kind of suggesting that Passover is when they want to actually sacrifice these red heifers. And again, if you recall, the Al-Aqsa storm and Hamas, the quote-unquote sneak attack and everything else, that was kind of brought up and brought upon 1948 Israel because they were storming the Temple Mount, and there was a lot of tension because the Jews want to sacrifice these red heifers, and the Arabs obviously see that as an abomination. So if that caused the tensions in 2023, they were going to do the red heifers last year on Passover. Could we see the red heifers being sacrificed in preparation for a third temple this year, which would really, that would really stir up the Arab world? It's possible. So I don't think, again, going back to this diagram here, I don't think it's coincidence that Ramadan, the middle of Ramadan, and then Purim fall on the blood moon that's visible in North America, yes. But this is obviously going to have consequences for America, which is a direct ally of Israel, gives them endless money and weapons and all kinds of support. And so this could be a sign that America is going to get dragged into a regional conflict that's going to swallow up the whole world, which I've been warning about repeatedly here on Overcome Babylon. Going back to the blood moon, another thing I want to mention is that this is what a lot of people don't realize. So when we're talking about historical patterns still, whenever there's a lunar eclipse of any kind, partial, total, it's always preceded by or after the blood moon, there is a solar eclipse. Or I should say blood moon, but after a lunar eclipse, there's always a solar eclipse. They're always 2 weeks apart. One can come first than the other, it doesn't matter. But there's always a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse 14 days apart. So when I said, yeah, there's a blood moon coming, it's going to be visible in the Americas, there's also a solar eclipse that's going to be visible on March 29th, 2 weeks later, roughly. And this is what it looks like on time and date. The path of totality is really weird. It's this half circle right here. That's the path of totality. So it's really Eastern Canada is where it's going to be mostly visible, the blotting out of the sun here. But it will be visible down into Maine. And then, of course, New York City is going to see the solar eclipse here with 21.83% obscuration or darkening of the sun. So that's interesting. So America, specifically North America, not so much Mexico and the southern parts, but for sure the United States and Canada are getting a double witness within a 2-week period. A blood moon first and then a solar eclipse on the East Coast for sure. That's interesting. So there's a double witness saying, watch out, get ready for something. And when you look at what the solar eclipse 2 weeks later from the blood moon looks like here, we have Iceland, we have Scandinavia, we have the UK getting shadowed. But of course, it's pretty weak. It's only 34% obscuration of the sun, but still, you have a solar eclipse that's visible in Europe. Well, what's going on in Europe? And also Russia. Even Russia is going to see this to a very small degree. But okay, interesting. So we're getting the impression of something. You let me know what you might think this means. But obviously, what we do know for a fact is that America is getting a double witness. Canada and the United States are getting a double witness. North America is getting, as a whole, and South America, they're getting a blood moon. So we need to keep our eyes open for what this could possibly mean. Again, I think the message is primarily just the way I see it. Okay? I could be wrong, but I'm seeing another really, really bad cold that might shut things down and change life again. When we go and, okay, so we talked a little bit about the historical patterns. We're going to still talk about historical patterns, but also let's look at the eclipses that were going on during, right before the pandemic of 2020. Let's take a look at what was going on. So you have a total lunar eclipse on January 21st, 2019. So basically a year before the pandemic was declared, you had a blood moon. This one was visible over basically almost the same area that we're seeing right now for this blood moon coming up in 2 weeks. So right before the pandemic, a year before the pandemic, there was a blood moon visible over the Americas once again. That's very fascinating. So maybe we should expect maybe a pandemic, but maybe it's not going to happen for another year. That's possible, according to the historical pattern here. But also when we look at the places of the eclipses that happened in 2020, so this is January 10th, 2020, you have another eclipse. This one's visible over Asia. This is visible over India, but also China. And China was the place where the China virus came from. So, okay, now we're getting some more clarity. Okay, 2020, January 10th. And when you look at other blood moons, which I've done, you can kind of understand some of the patterns here. This is getting a little interesting because, so there is another blood moon happening in 2025. So again, on March 14th, we're seeing a blood moon. You go to September 7th, which is almost exactly 6 months later. It's 177 days. You go to September 7th, and guess what? You're going to see a blood moon visible over China and India. This is a total lunar eclipse. So we're seeing 2 blood moons this year. And with what I showed you, right, historically, that's pretty suspicious. Because again, this is from January 10th, 2020. There was also an eclipse right around the time the pandemic was declared over India and China. And one more time, just to go back in time, 2019, there was an eclipse over the Americas. I'm seeing a little bit of a mirror image here, but in a shorter period of time. Instead of it being stretched out over a year period from 2019 to 2020, we're seeing a double eclipse, blood moon. Both of them are blood moons this time, starting in the Americas, going over in the exact same place, India and China once again. If that blew your mind, let me know in the comments. We're seeing the same kind of eclipse cycle that happened in 2019 and 2020 that took a year long from January to January. We're seeing it in a 6-month reduction, but it's the same locations that are seeing lunar eclipses. In this case, though, I think it's even more severe. It's 2 blood moons. So those are my historical patterns. We're already seeing the stock market dropping. We're already starting to see crypto. It might bounce back up. It might. But it could also be very likely, and some analysts would agree with me, although I don't know their motives. They might be trying to sell you a gold bar or a silver coin or something, but some analysts will agree, I think we hit the top in February. I think we reached a top. And we might get some news very soon that might stress the world out, lock them down, and, well, there goes the prosperity and everything else. And who was president during 2020 when the pandemic was going on? Well, same guy that's president right now. So there's, again, a lot of data points to talk about that are overlapping that made this analysis worth presenting to you, made this video worth it. If you're liking it so far, please drop a like, share it. People need to just at least be exposed and deserve to have an understanding or a little bit of an idea of what they could expect. So, as you know, there's no eclipses that right now that are happening over Israel necessarily. Okay? It's an American eclipse, but I just want to remind you of some things before we jump into some scriptures. Israel is in a lot of trouble. The biggest pride festivals are held in Tel Aviv. This is pretty common knowledge. Nearly 300,000 locals, tourists, and visitors will march, dance, and enjoy a celebration of Pride this year. So even though they're in a state of war, you betcha Pride is still on full swing going into June 13th, 2025. Of course, Jerusalem March for Pride and Tolerance 2025 is also going to take place in June. And so with all that being said, we know that 1948 Israel is in a place where they're not walking with God. They have abandoned God's law. They've abandoned his precepts, statutes, and judgments. And America's in the same place as well. And when we open up the word, we understand what Malachi chapter 2 says, and now, O priests, this commandment is for you. If you will not hear and if you will not take it to heart to give glory to my name, says the Lord of hosts, I will send a curse upon you, and I will curse your blessings. Yes, I have cursed them already, because you do not take it to heart. Behold, I will rebuke your descendants and spread refuse on your faces, the refuse of your solemn feasts, and one will take you away with it. So, I'm going to rebuke your descendants. So even if you believe Malachi chapter 2, this particular passage, to be historical only, it already happened, Judah and Israel were already judged, the 2 houses, the 2 kingdoms, he says right here, I'm going to rebuke your descendants. And he says, I don't like your solemn feasts. They're like refuse or dung. So again, that's why it's important to talk about Purim and holidays of Judaism, because even though they're not biblical in Leviticus 23, it's not in the Bible, like Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, God says, I'm going to judge you on your days. There's this connotation in multiple places where he says, I'm going to judge you on your days because I don't like what you're doing. You've walked away from me. You haven't taken to heart all the things that I said in the Bible, but then he's given us celestial signs, so it's important for us to pay attention. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. Now here, I don't like the man-made title because it has, it's not talking about Judah. It literally says Israel, which is a very intentional word choice by Isaiah. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know, my people do not consider. They are a sinful nation. They've turned away from the living God. And so the call today is to turn to the living God. If you haven't made Jesus the Lord of your life, make him Lord of your life and actually do what's pleasing in his sight, because his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and walking with him has absolutely been the joy of my life. I love walking with Christ. It's so amazing. The blessings, there's good times and bad times, right? Like, oh, why'd this happen to me? But there's always learning, there's always growing, there's always peace and shalom that I can't even explain it to the average person. They don't understand what I'm talking about. There's a peace in my heart I never had until I understood that living for God is my true purpose and assignment in this life, is to actually come under his sovereign rule. And there's blessing and restoration in that, rather than trying to do life on our own, because If you don't take on Jesus' yoke, you're taking on Satan's yoke. You can't have two masters. You're going to love one and hate the other. There's no, oh, I don't want to serve any God. No, you're going to serve some God. It's just not going to be the God of the Bible who actually loves you. And so the ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib. Israel has no idea who they are right now. I just did a whole entire deep dive about this. We went through the book of Joshua. Check out the live tab of this channel where I talk about the lost tribes of Israel. Israel does not know who they are. They do not consider who their master is. Israel is lost. And when I say Israel, I'm not talking about the little piece of real estate the size of New Jersey in the Middle East. Israel is a whole lot bigger than that. Multitudes of nations are going to proceed from Sarah. Abraham was given the prophecies in Genesis. His descendants will be like the stars. Yeah, Israel is massive. They don't even know who they are anymore. But by God's grace, there's a lot of clues, and we can figure out their locations like I have here on Overcome Babylon with pretty good accuracy. And then what does he say? Isaiah chapter 1, verse 13. The new moons, the Sabbaths, and the calling of assemblies, I cannot endure iniquity in the sacred meetings. So things like Purim. As a nation, whether here in the United States, where there's a lot of practitioners of Judaism or Messianics that observe Purim, or over in 1948 Israel, God is saying, as a whole, my people have forsaken me. Their new moons, Sabbaths, and the calling of their assemblies, I hate these things. My soul hates the new moons and your appointed feasts. Notice he says your appointed feasts. Because, again, there's a lot of traditions and a lot of things that have been added. Traditions aren't necessarily bad, but God is saying that my soul hates the fact that you do all your traditions, you're doing all these things, and you don't even do like what I'm saying, like, right? Like Israel's about to have a bunch of pride festivals in just a few months. America's going to have a bunch of pride festivals in just a few months. It's like, there's judgment. I don't know what else to say. There's judgment coming. They are a trouble to me. I am weary of bearing your assemblies and meetings and feasts that have nothing to do with me, or they're just absent. You're just absent. You're not even walking with me the way that I said. And then, of course, Amos chapter 8, verse 10, there's this idea that God is going to turn the feasts of the Jews into mourning. So this could be Purim. This could be, other Jewish holidays that are not necessarily in the Bible, or it could be biblical holidays as well, which is why it's so important to pay attention to biblical holidays like Passover and everything else as well. He's going to turn what should have been a joyous time of getting together with family, like on Sukkot, into mourning, and your songs into lamentation. I will bring sackcloth on every waist, baldness on every head. I'll make it like mourning for an only son, and its end like a bitter day. Even if you believe that Amos chapter 8, verse 10 is speaking historically of something that happened in the past only, it's still, you have to pay attention. God doesn't like when people walk away from him as an individual or a nation. He has a problem with that, and he holds his people accountable, and he's going to turn their feasts into mourning. So special days on their calendars, whether it's the Jews with Passover, Sukkot, Pentecost, or maybe other holidays that are important to people, we should be watching out for a time when those could be turned into significant prophetic dates with biblical consequences. That's what we're looking for. So that's why I look at what feast days are coming up, including Purim, what's going on with Ramadan, what's going on with other religious observances, and we can kind of connect some dots and see if God did this in the past. Let's just say, I believe Amos chapter 8, verse 10 is talking about a future event. But even if it's historical, this is who he is. He doesn't change, so he's probably going to do something similar again. And then, of course, Isaiah 22, I keep talking about the archers of Elam prophecy, and how Iran is going to strike Israel. I've been talking about this, and God says there will be no atonement for you even until your death, because when he called for fasting, people were just eating and drinking and being merry for let us eat and drink for tomorrow we die. So Isaiah chapter 22, keep your eyes on that, because I'm expecting the archers of Elam prophecy to unfold. Now, just another little side note here. As we approach the blood moon cycle, it's about a 6-month blood moon cycle going in the future here. We got to keep our eyes on the fact that God has his very specific agenda, message, and we need to be attentive to that. We need to be open to understanding what that is. And when you look at Exodus chapter 7, you also need to be reminded of the fact that when Moses and Aaron went to go speak to Pharaoh, Pharaoh was going to say, hey, show me a miracle. And so what Aaron was commanded to do was cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants. And in Exodus chapter 7, verse 10, Aaron's rod became a serpent. But what happened? In Exodus chapter 7, verse 11, Pharaoh also called the wise men and sorcerers, so the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments, for every man threw down his rod and they became serpents, but Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And then in Exodus chapter 8, verse 18, it says that the magicians worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not bring forth lice, right? So there were lice on man and beast because of the plague of God. So the magicians, they're always trying to copy, they're always trying to steal God's glory. Not that they can, but they're always trying to steal the narrative. Remember what happened on April 8th, which is, if you look at my screen here, or my book, I should say, the solar eclipse that passed through Texas and passed through the East Coast here on April 8th, 2024. CERN was opening up portals, right? They're doing, well, I can't necessarily say that, but they were doing, although there's plenty of evidence, they were activating their colliders and their particle colliders, all that kind of stuff. CERN was doing some crazy stuff. Again, it goes back to the narrative of Exodus. Pharaoh's magicians are always doing stuff to try to steal the narrative, so just keep your eyes open. No doubt there's going to be something suspicious going on the dark side, but remember, God has his narrative. These are his signs. No matter how badly the enemy tries to steal the narrative from God, he can't. Truth always prevails. And so the Hebrew year 5861 is coming up. The first month is expected to begin March 30th, 2024, Sunday evening. We are going to have Passover, April 12th sundown to April 13th sundown, which is a Sunday. So go to overcomebabylon.com, keep the feast. Again, if this is new to you, what I just presented here, we don't keep the feast out of a spirit of pride, performance, and legalism. We keep God's holidays, or try to observe them as best we can, because Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And so it's out of a heart of love, gratitude, and friendship with our master that we actually are like, I'm not going to do Halloween, Christmas, and Easter. I just want to do biblical holidays. I want to learn the traditions of Passover. Like what's going on with Passover? I want to learn these things. And I want to learn the deeper meanings found in the Bible. And there's a blessing in that. And so I strongly encourage you to walk like Jesus walked, like a first century rabbi who kept Torah. Not in a spirit of pride, performance, and legalism, but just walk these things out, and you're going to have a great understanding of end times prophecy, great understanding of the text. The Bible will become alive to you in a way that maybe hasn't happened quite yet. If you've never done the feast, that's definitely true. And so shalom, God bless you. And watch out for what is going on in the heavenly realms, from earthquakes to economic problems to really, really bad colds to wars and rumors of wars. I've given you a lot of stuff to think about. So I don't want to overwhelm you too much. I have more, but I'll just leave it here. God bless you. I'll catch you next time.